Welcome in, people. Glad to have you along today. It's already Thursday on the ride home. I mean, it's Thursday in other places, too. The way I said it, it was like we have our own day. Like, time is moving differently at a unique pace here on the ride home, which could be the case. I don't know. John Hall's still on vacation. I'm still going it solo, but not alone, because my producer, Christy Stockdill, in the other room. Christy, greetings to you.
Hello, hello.
We have a great show ahead. Excited in the 5 o'clock hour because we're going to be talking with Amy Grant. I've loved Amy and her music for a long time. So it was really great to be able to talk to her. We pre-recorded the interview because she had to get on a tour bus yesterday and make her way up here to Pittsburgh for her date at the Palace Theater in Greensburg on Friday evening. It's not Saturday. It is Friday evening. And so we pre-recorded it yesterday, and it's really wonderful, and I can't wait for you guys to hear it. So in the 5 o'clock hour, we will hear from Amy Grant. Also, my good friend Alan Noble, who's such a great writer. If you haven't followed Alan either online or in his writing or at Christ of Pop Culture, you're missing out. And but that's okay, because I can introduce you to him in just a couple minutes. So Alan Noble coming up. We're going to talk about identity. He's got a new book that's coming out called You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to God in an Inhuman World. I'm going to ask him why he decided to call it inhuman and not inhumane. Anyway, so we'll talk to Alan a little bit. Also, a couple other things. It's National Play-Doh Day, so we're going to get into that. I mean, like, do you see the little pun there? Look, we're going to get into that.
I got it.
Yeah, all right. Also, Thanksgiving turkey shopping has already started, which seems like we've lost our minds. I mean, I pulled up in front of the dentist this morning, and I was right in front of one of those houses that has gotten into Halloween in a way that seems excessive. Do you know what I'm talking about? You know, with things that are inflated and have lit up, and there's a lot of plastic, and there's a lot of accoutrement, you know what I mean? Like, we got the skeleton, we got the witch and the smoke, and it seems like we're not even, like, it's still summer. Anyway, we'll talk about that and many things as today's show develops. But before we get into any of that, Christy, I do believe it would be time for the top four at 4. And I do have it for Thursday, September 16th, 2021. Number 1. A leading figure in the Afghan resistance has retained a Washington lobbyist to seek military and financial support in the United States for a fight against the Taliban, according to today's New York Times. Ahmad Massoud, the leader of one of the most prominent groups of fighters seeking to oust the Taliban from power, signed the contract this week with Robert Strike, who built a lobbying practice during the Trump administration, working with clients that others on K Street were wary of representing. The contract, which was filed with the Justice Department last evening, and indicates that the work will be pro bono, it's a relief, comes as an array of Afghan constituencies are seeking lobbying help as they jockey for recognition in Washington and in the international community. While Afghan opposition groups have support from some Republicans in Washington, the Biden administration has made it clear that it has no interest in playing any further role in a civil war in Afghanistan. A representative for Mr. Massoud said that a primary motivation for his lobbying campaign was to stop any move by the U.S. and other governments to grant legitimacy to the Taliban or anyone other than Mr. Massoud as the rightful leader of Afghanistan. Number 2. Close to half of all new U.S. gun buyers since the beginning of 2019 have been women, a shift for a market long dominated by men, according to a new study in today's Wall Street Journal. The primary results of the 2021 National Firearms Survey show an estimated 3.5 million women became new gun owners from January 2019 through April of this year. About 4 million men became new gun owners over that period, they found. In addition to its findings on gender, the survey also found that new gun buyers were more racially diverse than existing owners. Among new gun buyers, 55% were white, 21% were black, and 19% were Hispanic. Among new women gun owners, 28% were black. Number 3. Russian President Vladimir Putin says dozens of his staff have been infected with the coronavirus and that he will continue his self-isolation because of the outbreak. According to ABC News, the Kremlin announced earlier this week that he would self-isolate after someone in his inner circle was infected, although Putin had tested negative for the virus and he's fully vaccinated with Russia's Sputnik 5. But Putin said today the infections were extensive. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said those infected were mainly those, quote, who take part in ensuring the work and activities of the head of state, in other words, his security. Although Russia was the first country to roll out a coronavirus vaccine, less than 30% of the country is fully vaccinated. Number 4. And the Buccos celebrated Roberto Clemente Day in style last night with a walk-off win at PNC Park. When Colin Moran hit a bouncer to first, Wilmer Defoe turned on the gas and scored from second. It was really awesome. I wasn't watching the game because, of course, you know my cable doesn't work. I think I told you all that. That was Sunday. I still haven't had time to even call them to tell them what happened. Anyway. Scored from second to beat the Reds 5-4. The Pirates and Reds played again today, and it looks like the Buccos they have not swept a team this whole I can't stand. Okay, it's top 4 at 4. That's it. People, why? I mean, I know the Pirates are not a good team. They're 54-92. Okay, this is clearly not a winning record. However, you'd think that over a season, you could sweep somebody. They can't sweep anybody. Not one single team have they swept. Anyway, look, I'm dwelling on the negative. When last night was such a great night, Roberto Clemente Day, Major League Baseball, it was such an exciting ending. Defoe is so fun to watch. Anyway, so I'm going to think on that, you guys, okay? I just am. I'm not going to be worried about the fact that they can't sweep a single blessed team an entire baseball season. All right, coming up next, my good friend Alan Noble. You are not your own. What does it mean to belong to God in an inhuman world? That's next. Glad you're along for the ride home. Modern culture tells us that we belong to us, that we're the most important person in our story. And so when it comes to matters of identity, maybe it's our gender, maybe it's our sexuality, maybe it's our occupation, maybe it's the career path that we've chosen, or our education, or the neighborhood we live in, or whatever we choose to do with our whatever that is that we get to pick, that is going to determine our identity and who we are. And it sounds like it's a grand bargain. It seems like it's ultimate freedom. You know, if I don't like what structure someone puts on me, I can just throw it off and I can just be me. But I think the problem is that it's too much. It's kind of like all of the channels on cable or all of the streaming options. It's that you sit down to watch something and you can't come up with anything because you have too many choices. And so maybe we need to find out more about how we were designed to be by someone who could know us better than we know ourselves. Well, to talk about these weighty issues, and I bet a lot of other, as I said on Twitter today, miscellany, I've invited my friend Alan Noble back to the program. Alan is assistant professor of English at Oklahoma Baptist University. He's co-founder and editor-in-chief of Christ and Pop Culture. He's written for The Atlantic, BuzzFeed, all over the place. Also the author of a book called Disruptive Witness that I loved. But we're here to talk about his newest project, which is called You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to God in an Inhuman World. Alan Noble, welcome back.
Thanks. I'm excited.
What's up?
Be back.
How are you?
Well, I am well.
Great. I'm glad to hear it. You did not say good. That's the world of a writer. Alan.
I teach grammar.
I know you do, and you don't want to embarrass yourself in front of your students. So what about, it seems like it's a grand deal, right? You get to sit down at night. You have 680 options on your cable. You have 600,000 options between Amazon Prime and Netflix. I mean, what's the problem?
So there's an interesting phenomenon where when your choices increase, as your choices increase, actually you become more and more dissatisfied. It's harder to be content when you have a greater number of choices, to the point where you get what's called choice paralysis, where you go to the the cereal aisle in the supermarket and you just need one box, but there are so many different options, and the aisle goes like 15 or 20 feet, and all these different variations in cereals, and you're trying to weigh the health benefits and all these different components, the price, and so on and so forth, and you get to a point where you're just like, I can't do anything. I'm just gonna. I guess I'll have eggs, and that sort of thing, which is fine, unless you have high cholesterol.
No, seriously, that's a fine.
That sort of thing is what happens to us. Except, not just in purchasing, but in the freedom that we're given, the ultimate freedom, the absurd, limitless freedom we're given to create our meaningful story.
So creating our story is something that is all over our culture right now. In fact, it's like the mission in life, I would say, for the contemporary person, is discovering who you are, right? That's the ultimate goal. It's the path that you're on. It's the thing that you're striving for. And when I look at that, even if it's hard to divorce myself from being a believer in Jesus, but I feel like I know my personality well enough to know even if I was not a believer in Jesus, that would scare me. Instead of liberating me, I would be scared by that. I don't know if other people would respond that way, but it just seems like it's a weighty responsibility.
Yes, it absolutely is. And so there are a couple of different options available to you. Secular society tries to provide options to help you cope with that burden. So, for example, society will give you different scripts to follow of living certain kinds of good lives that are always optional, right? So, if I say to you, for example, well, you could be, a successful entrepreneur, right? And this is one model, one script of a good life that you can follow. But I always have to say, well, Kathy, this is just an option available to you. You don't have to do it. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. So there's always that sense of of the uncertainty of everything. Everything is optional, and nothing feels certain. But that's one way we cope. We also cope by distracting ourselves, which I wrote about in my first book. We also numb ourselves. I mean, there's a significant part of our culture. Think about how often we talk about, self-care, and there's a lot of coping that has to go on in the modern world because we have created a society that's not designed for humans, and so we self-medicate.
Talk about your choice of using the word inhuman in your subtitle. What does that mean?
Yeah, so my basic thesis is that we have, as a society, have built a society, because we humans get to build their own society, with institutions, laws, values, aesthetics, morals, all those sorts of things that assume something wrong about what it means to be human. They assume an understanding or an anthropology that is mistaken. The example I've been giving is of zoochosis. So if you've been to a zoo and you've seen a zoo animal walking in circles, pacing in circles, creating like a dirt path, you can tell that they're anxious. And even though that bear's cage, let's say, was designed intentionally with that bear, perhaps by the best scientists in the world, right, who knows so much about that bear, and yet it's not home. It's not that proper environment. And so what happens? They feel anxious and depressed. And so actually sometimes we give animals antidepressants, which is depressing.
Right.
So I think that, in an analogous way, our society we've structured is not built for us as human beings.
And so, yeah. And so our ways of finding, interesting. You talked about animals being medicated or giving antidepressants, right? That's kind of a picture. I imagine that kind of helps me to understand what you're getting at, because it's kind of like, from our perspective, we want to be able to have the animal in this small area and have it be fine. But then it's
right.
not. But then it's not.
No. Yeah, so they treat them with antidepressants, or they'll do enrichment activities, which is, they'll throw like a weighted ball in for the animal to play with. And when I read about those two methods of helping these animals cope with an environment that's not designed for them, I was like, wait, I feel like that's me. I feel like I'm giving distractions by society. Hey, look at this new phone, look at this TV show, whatever. And here's antidepressants. If you feel alienated, depressed, anxious, overwhelmed, exhausted, because your environment is inhuman. And I do think that's where we are.
Yeah. No, I think it's an accurate assessment. And then the question is, what do we do about it? Alan Noble is with me, and we're going to answer that question, or maybe at least we'll toss it around. He's the author of the brand new book called You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to God in an Inhuman World. Okay, so inhuman world. So we're looking at circumstances that are sometimes outside of our control. Right. So we're confronted with tons of choices everywhere. We got tons of choices on the internet. We have tons of choices on our television, tons of choices in what kind of phone to buy, what we can look at on our phone, the kinds of ways we can label ourselves, right? The kinds of subgroups we can put ourselves into, all that sort of thing. If that's inhuman in your assessment, then what would human look like?
So what my analysis in this book, the route I go is when I'm describing all of those inhuman qualities, I decided that really they all have to do with a certain assumption of being human, and that assumption is that we are our own and we belong to ourselves. Okay? So, for example, if I am my own and I belong to myself, I am the only one who is and ever can be responsible for creating, defining, discovering, expressing my identity. I'm the only one who can decide what relationships define me and what relationships don't. I'm the only one who can decide when I have a meaningful life and what life means for me. It's all on me. And that, I think, is what society thinks being human entails. And it gives us the tools to try to pursue that, which is, again, as we've been discussing, overwhelming. So the alternative that I'm describing this comes from the Heidelberg Catechism, the first question and answer, which is, what is your only comfort in life and death? That we are not our own, but belong in body and soul in life and death to our faithful Savior, Jesus Christ. And what I explore is the possibility that when we are not our own and we belong to the right being, when we belong to God as opposed to another human, then those unbearable burdens that society are placing on us can be lifted. And that's a tremendous benefit.
Yeah. Alan, belonging to the right being, right? I mean, that's so key. I always try, I grew up in a household, Alan, where I had one parent who was a believer in Jesus and then one who wasn't. And it wasn't until later in my dad's life that he came to believe in Jesus as well. But for the years that I was growing up that were formative for me, I was always thinking to myself, okay, how do I talk about church in a way that would not alienate my dad? That was just part of my world, like part of my method of communicating, method of thinking. And so even to this day doing the show, I'm always thinking, okay, so if someone's listening to the program who's never cracked a Bible, never walked into a church, doesn't know anything about a Christian culture or subculture, when they hear belonging to, that's negative, right? Because to them, it seems like, okay, so I belong to a girlfriend and she ruined me. Or I belong to my parents and they abused me, or I belong to, and so that it all hinges on who that being is that we belong to.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and I think we have to be honest and acknowledge that this language of not being our own has historically been used by people who are abusive in positions of power, political power, religious power. Priests and pastors and ministers. And so part of the reason contemporary people react very negatively to that phrase, you are not your own but belong to Christ or to anyone else, right? Is that we're very aware how that can be manipulated by abusers. But the other part of it is that we have been culturally trained inside and outside the church to assume that the safest thing and the surest thing is to belong to yourself. And what I would try to do in the first half of the book is take a step back and really ask the question, well, is that safe? Like, is that not abusive as well? Like, are we not miserable belonging to ourselves? Because if that doesn't work, then I think we can get to the place where we say, all right, well, what's the alternative? And then that breaks down that barrier, exactly what you're talking about, especially for someone who's not a Christian. Well, why would you want to belong to someone else? Well, if belonging to yourself is terrible, then maybe we need to consider it. And the key for me is that belonging to God is the only being for whom he can desire our good and his good without conflict. Okay? Because at some point, a parent is going to put their personal good ahead of their children. At some point, a spouse is going to put their personal good ahead of their spouse. At some point, an employer is going to put themselves in front of the good of their employees. It's always going to happen with humans who are fallible. But God, who knows the good, can desire what is good in his perfect will and is good for us without conflict. And that means he's the one who can't abuse us and won't abuse us. And that's why we can belong to him without fear.
Right. That's the only safe place. That's all there is. That's just really the only safe place. All right, Alan, I need to take a break. When we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Alan Noble. His new book, it's coming out at the beginning of October, I believe. It's called You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to God in an Inhuman World. If you've got too many choices, you feel like you're overwhelmed, well, we're going to talk about it. Continuing next on The Ride Home. Talking to my friend Alan Noble. He's got a new workout called You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to God in an Inhuman World. Alan, I was a big Norm Macdonald. I still am a Norm Macdonald fan. And he passed away on Tuesday at 61. And so, since then, I've been just watching clip after clip after clip. And I watched one today that was really thought-provoking. He's was a thought-provoking person. And he was interviewing Jerry Seinfeld. And he asked Jerry, he said, Jerry, you believe in God? And Jerry answered, I don't want to speak for Jerry. You could watch Jerry's response. But after Jerry said what he said, Norm said, when I look in your eyes, and then Jerry laughed and he's like, no one has ever said that to me in a comedy interview. And so Norm laughed, but he was still very serious. And he said, and that's the beauty of the comedian, right? Is that, they're making a joke, but they can be more serious than anybody as well. He said to Jerry, when I look in your eyes, I see an eternal being. Which is an interesting thing to say, but it was even more interesting how Jerry responded to it because he was like taken aback by it. And then he said, thank you. And I felt like that kind of that interchange speaks to what you have written about, which is kind of like Norm was saying, you look like you belong to somebody.
Yeah.
And I really, that was so meaningful to me when I saw it. So, based on what you've written and how you're looking at things, you hear a conversation like that. Do you hear that as well? You belong to somebody?
Yes. Yeah. And the difficult part is that we do various things to numb that feeling or to channel it in other directions. So if we all acknowledge on some level that we do belong to someone, what we tend to do is to not accept that being might be God, and so we'd rather turn that sense of belonging into a kind of optional thing in a romantic relationship, and until the romance fizzles, and then we find someone new. Or we don't look at each other in the eyes because we don't want to see that image of God. We don't attend to things carefully so that we don't have to acknowledge it. We alienate ourselves from each other and from our own bodies and our experiences so that we don't have to acknowledge the transcendent that pierces through the everyday and reminds us that there is a God to whom we belong.
Yeah. Yeah, and I should have made it clear, maybe it was, hopefully it was implied, that what it seemed like Norm was saying is you look like somebody who belongs to God.
Right.
And so just saying that, and isn't it interesting that Jerry said thank you? Because it was like an honor. It was like it wasn't a passing comment. It was something that he clearly thought seriously about, and Jerry took as a compliment.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's precious,
isn't it?
I mean, and kind of gives you chills. Frankly, not the kind of interaction we see very regularly. And as you said, maybe it's one of those things that maybe comedians are the only ones who can get away with, socially at least, because they're so expected to be funny that when they're serious, that we believe their seriousness.
Alan Noble's with me. The new book is called You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to God in an Inhuman World. Alan, tell me about what researching this topic, and you've done a ton of research, and writing the book has done for you, like in your own personal life. Have you changed?
Yeah. So, when you can't diagnose a problem, then you have no agency to respond to it. When it feels normal to live a life that's intolerable or unsustainable or overwhelming, then you can't do anything to make a substantial difference. And so one of the things that this has done is that when I interact in the world and I experience one of the innumerable ways that our society assumes that I am my own and that I have this burden to carry my life and make my life meaningful and do all these sorts of things. And so I'm not treated as a full human being made in the image of God. Instead, I'm viewed as just another being. I can acknowledge that, and I can say, okay, well, this is this lie of the contemporary world, and I don't have to let it have control over my life. Now, the challenge here is that the problem doesn't go away. I'm still going to be treated this way, but at least I have the awareness to label it what it is. So one of the ways I see this, is in the life of my wife, but also many Christian women, or women in general, who stay at home with their children for any period of time. My wife has 2 master's degrees, and she spent a period of time unemployed for various reasons. And she was with my kids, and when we would meet someone new, they would always ask, "So what do you do?"
What do you do?
Right?
She says,
what do you
clearly
do?
nothing.
That's the question. Right, and so even if she'd said, I stay home with my kids, and even if they thought that was good, right? So they might say something like, "Oh, that's great. So what does your husband do?" Right. So there's even when they're nice about it, there's this implication that, wow, so your life is meaningless right now. Like, your life is on pause. The meaning of your life
Hope
is
you can work
non-existent.
up to something better.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So now, knowing those things, knowing that, okay, this is part of the lie of modernity, that I, in my own, and I have to make my life interesting and exciting and meaningful, and staying home with kids doesn't count, apparently, even though it's an incredibly human thing to do, to raise human children. Right? So my wife, having that awareness, can say, okay, I know what this is. I don't have to let it affect me. However, I think it's important to acknowledge that people are still going to treat her that way, right? Mm-hmm. So having that awareness doesn't mean that the rest of the world is woken and stops treating you inhumanely. And I think that's important to recognize.
Yeah,
because we need to have grace for each other.
Yeah, and let me say this: that I was in your wife's position. I had a career for a decade, and then I had my kids, and I was home for a decade, and then I got a new career, and that intermediate 10 years when I was home with my kids, I thought I was committed to staying home. I thought it was the best thing for them, blah, blah. I had all the theory in my head. As soon as I had the child and stayed home, all of a sudden, I lost my identity. I didn't have it. I was losing my mind. I felt like, now, even though I had all the theory, I'd read all the books, I made my own decision, my husband was totally behind me, blah, blah, blah. I had everything lined up. But when it came down to it, I couldn't get out of my head what society had told me didn't matter. I couldn't. It took me years, Alan, to get through that.
Yeah. Yes, and that experience, which I think is actually really common, it speaks so much to me about this inhuman society that we've created. Because we've talked about one little fraction of that, which is a career for women, and just the fact that basically all adults are judged by how successful they are in their career. But there are other aspects. So, for example, the way we lay out cities. We lay out cities and housing, assuming that everyone wants to live isolated lives. Now, when you're raising children, raising them alone is depressing.
It sure is.
It is literally depressing. You need adult interaction, but we isolated ourselves so much that we can't raise children in community. We're away from our families because we're expected to move wherever we want to have our career. And then we're away from friends, and maybe we'll have play dates, but that's not the same as just waking up and expecting to see a friend. Just walking around or something, and then being able to watch your kids for a half an hour, just randomly while you take a nap, or just get a break, or have adult conversation. So, and add to that the responsibilities we have as parents. We're constantly told that you have to be better and better at parenting, right? Like, you're never good enough. There's always some better napping method or potty training method or whatever that will make your child's life perfect. And if you don't do it right, they're probably going to get screwed up. So you add all of those things, which I believe all come down to this core issue of anthropology, and it's a normal experience to be miserable doing one of the most human things you can possibly do, and that is raise other human beings.
You're so right. Listen, I went through years where I would go to bed at night and hate myself for the horrible lunches I was packing for my children. Now,
Yeah.
Now it is, but I got all that from social media, Alan, because I was on all the mommy blogs, and they were like, "Oh, look, I'm providing organic, vegan, free range snacks for my child at 10 a.m. And then when lunch comes, I've got 2 half sandwiches and a cucumber." And I just was hating. I thought, I am the worst. My children are going to be ruined, and we're laughing about it now. But in the middle of the night, when you have no contact in your life but little kids, you think, if they're going to live and die based on the decisions I'm making.
Absolutely.
It's just it's really hard. Alan, our time's up, so we have to come back. So when does that book come out?
The 12th of October.
Terrific.
October 12th.
Okay, so we have a lot of time. So before, like around the time it comes out, which is a couple weeks from now, let's get together again, talk about it again, because I can think of 20 different other instances we could talk about. Real life examples of how identity fits in and changes us, and why we wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning because we think that we're not enough. Alan Noble, the book, You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to God in an Inhuman World. Alan, thank you for your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
Terrific. Great to talk to you. I absolutely love museums. And I particularly love art museums. And I was in Europe a couple years ago, and the art museum, we have terrific art museums here. I'm not trying to be one of those people that says, oh, everything in Europe is better than here. It's not. It's absolutely not the case. But the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam is an unmissable place to visit. It is so beautiful. It's so wonderfully done, how it's put together. The sunflower room, it's just... It's so beautiful. It made me cry. So it was with interest that I saw this story today in the AP, reprinted in the Trib, that says that a drawing newly attributed to Vincent van Gogh that has never been displayed publicly before is going on show at the Amsterdam museum that bears his name. The new Van Gogh, which is called Study for Worn Out, from November 1882, is part of a Dutch private collection and was only known to a handful of people, including a few from the Van Gogh Museum. The owner is remaining anonymous and asked the museum to determine for sure if the unsigned drawing really is by Van Gogh. From the style to the materials used, it does apparently conform to Van Gogh's Hague drawings, says senior researcher Theo Miedentorp. There are even traces of damage on the back, linking it to the way Van Gogh used wads of starch to attach sheets of paper to drawing boards. But what's so cool about it is it's not like Van Goghs are discovered all the time. I mean, you feel like all the Van Goghs that are out there we know about. And so it's just really, really wonderful to be able to see this. Apparently, it comes from a time in the artist's career when he was working to improve his skills as a painter of people and portraits by drawing them over and over and over again. The museum already owns the almost identical drawing, Worn Out. And so apparently when you look at the two of them, which I'm seeing here in the reprint in the AP, they do look similar. I got to tell you, it's just really beautiful. It's not the kind of thing, if you're thinking of Van Gogh and you're thinking of A Starry Night or you're thinking of sunflowers, it's not like that. It's just a pencil drawing, and it's black and white, black and gray and white. It is so moving. I mean, yeah, I just encourage you, if you want to get your phone out or your computer and just Google the new Van Gogh and see what comes up. I think you'll be really, really pleased and perhaps touched. Van Gogh was a believer in Jesus, as was his brother Theo and Theo's wife. Theo's wife, I can't think of her name right now. Bothers me that her name has escaped me, but she's the reason why we even have any of the Van Goghs, because she preserved them and preserved all of the correspondence between she and Vincent and Theo, and it's a unbelievably sad story, but there are beautiful, beautiful elements about how God was working in that family. Anyway, just a personal love of mine, and I hope if you're not a lover of Van Gogh, that you might give him a chance. So check that out. It's in the AP. You can see it in today's Trib. Okay, I'm going to take a break. When we come back, it looks like Thanksgiving turkey shopping has already started. Get out of here. Why are we so crazy? pretty early on in the pandemic that I coined the phrase COVID ruins everything. Because it does. I mean, every time you think, oh, well, this is a part of life that hasn't been affected by COVID, you realize that it has been affected by COVID and it's been ruined in some way. Well, I remember last year in the fall, it was maybe beginning of October. And I started reading that, of course, we'd been through the fact that, nobody could buy toilet paper for a while. Nobody could buy Clorox wipes. Then nobody could buy paper towels and nobody could buy tissues. Then it was like all paper products, right? So we went through all that. Well, when we hit October, all of a sudden nobody could buy pumpkin. Do you remember that? Canned pumpkin was not findable. And if you could find it, it was really expensive. Now, by the time Thanksgiving rolled around, that had kind of, at least in this area of the country, in the Northeast, it had come to, like, you could find it again. But there was like a 3-week period where there was no canned pumpkin. And here's the reason why there was no canned pumpkin. Is people were going to grocery stores and doing the toilet paper trick, but with pumpkin, right? So these crazy people that make pumpkin rolls and pumpkin pie and pumpkin, I don't know what, and Christy's pumpkin. What's that drink you have? What's that called?
The pumpkin cream cold brew.
Oh my gosh, whatever that is. Okay, so people were freaking out, thinking, "Oh my gosh, I for sure, I might not survive the pandemic anyway, but I for sure can't survive it if I don't have pumpkin." And so they started buying pumpkin in quantity, right? So the pumpkin suppliers were like, "Wait, what?" And so they didn't have enough pumpkin. Anyway, I'm bringing all this up because there was an article in today's Wall Street Journal that is making me feel a little better about things. Okay. So it says that Thanksgiving for us, of course, is, 2 months away. But at grocery chain Tops Market, they are already prepared. And they're using Tops as an example of grocery stores who are trying to get ahead of what happened last year. Right. So the guy at Tops says, hey, last Thanksgiving, last Halloween were really hard for us because we were short of everything. We were short not just of pumpkin, but we were short of turkeys. We were short of spices, and we didn't have cranberry sauce. Listen, if there's no cranberries, I mean, I'll be grateful, but I don't think I'm having Thanksgiving dinner, okay? Because that's really what I'm there for. Anyway, grocery chains have now they're thinking ahead. They've gotten their act together. And it looks like, according to Tops, we are going to be in a very good place for October and November when it comes to all of these items. Mr. Culhane, who's Senior VP of Merchandising for Tops, is quoted in the Wall Street Journal by saying, "We locked down our turkeys in the 2nd and 3rd week of February." I mean, that's like pre-Valentine's Day. He's already thinking about turkeys. Anyway. Supermarket executives say they have secured many holiday staples after ordering more products such as stuffing, also, and gravy from a wider range of brands than usual. And many are trying to receive items faster so they can have them stored in their warehouses. They are buying goods earlier to ensure they get as many products as possible from suppliers ahead of the holidays. Still, grocery industry officials are warning us, so get ready, okay, that not every brand, not every flavor, or not every size of food you want for Thanksgiving or Christmas will be available. And your stuff might cost more because, as I said, COVID ruins everything. A range of products, including bottled beverages and snacks. What does snacks mean? Like, what are running short? That's what it says as logistical. What does it mean? All snacks are running short? I mean, I was in Gineal. There were a lot of Oreos. Maybe that's the only snack I care about. Seriously, I love Oreos so much. Anyway, companies are also short of truck drivers and plant workers while goods continue to get held up moving through ports. Supermarkets right now are sometimes receiving as little as 40% of what they order. Okay. But holiday staples such as gravy, cranberry sauce, don't forget nutmeg, they said, and cinnamon spices, in addition to, get ready for this, red and green sprinkles for treats. Mm-hmm. They've purchased ahead. They've gotten the red and green sprinkles. You guys, COVID still ruins everything. Okay, so Christy, you've gotten your pumpkin cold brew. What's it? Pumpkin cream.
Pumpkin cream, yeah.
Cold brew. Does that mean there's milk in it?
I think so. It's just cold brew coffee.
Yeah.
And then on top is this creamy foam. So maybe in the foam there's cream. I have no idea how they make it, and it just drizzles down on in.
Oh, do you put sugar in that?
No.
Really?
Yeah, just plain cold brew.
That's good. That has a lot of caffeine.
Oh, yeah. It gets me through the day.
Wow. So you have one of those?
I'm not every day. I haven't been since the Starbucks has been having some issues.
It's like McDonald's with the McFlurry machine.
That's right.
Isn't it?
That's right.
I went on the site McBroken.
McBroken.
Okay, if you go on McBroken, you can track you can put your location, and the closest McDonald's to you will come up, and you can click on each one, and they'll say broken, working, broken,
That's
working. I mean, it's
amazing.
absolutely great. So if you need a McFlurry, you should definitely look to make sure that the machine's working. Anyway, much more to come in the 5 o'clock hour. Amy Grant will be with me, so stay close to the ride home. We'll be back in a little bit. Welcome in. Thanks for coming along on today's edition of The Ride Home. John Hall's still on vacation. I'm going it solo. But as I said, not alone. I've got my producer, Christy Stockdill, in the other room.
I'm always here for you, Kat.
Thank you, Christy. You and your pumpkin cream cold brew. I would like that if I poured sugar in it. Or, even better, I would like it if I could pour it over ice cream.
Ooh, that would be good.
Wouldn't that be good?
That'd be good.
That's why I can't drink coffee, because I want it over ice cream. And then, of course, I wouldn't be able to fit in my pants.
Yeah.
So it kind of defeats the purpose. So anyway, but I want you to love it. And I'm glad you do. Anyway, we have a terrific hour. In just a couple minutes, we're going to play my conversation with Amy Grant. I recorded it last night because Amy was just about to get on a tour bus to make her way from Nashville, where she lives, up here to Pittsburgh for the concert on Friday night at the Palace Theater in Greensburg. And it's just it's a great conversation. Amy's exactly as she seems. And I'm eager for you to hear that. But before we go to a break and listen to my conversation with Amy, I want to talk about an article that I saw in today's Wall Street Journal that was really sobering. It's an opinion piece written by Paul Tunz, and it's about the burning of Canada's churches. This is something I knew nothing about, and perhaps you don't either. He writes, "It's been a difficult summer for Canada's Christians. Over 5 days in late June, 4 Catholic churches and an Anglican church were burned to the ground. The first churches to be set ablaze or vandalized to begin a summer of such desecration. Suspicious fires then broke out across the country. In all, at least 56 churches have been set aflame or vandalized, according to the True North Center, which is mapping attacks on churches. This is unquestionably a crisis," Paul Tunz writes, "but you wouldn't think it from observing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's response. Although the first suspected arson happened June 21st, he didn't speak out on it until July 1st. Worse, after dozens of the incidents across 7 different provinces and territories, there has been only one arrest." Am I wrong? Asked Aaron Woodrick of the Macdonald Laurier Institute. Or have more people been arrested in Canada this year for going inside a church to worship than for burning one down? Police are investigating whether the suspected arsons are connected to the news that hundreds of children were buried in unmarked graves at government-mandated church-run Indian residential schools in Canada. The residential schools operated from 1883 to 1996. Can you believe that? To 1996. They were populated by approximately 150,000 Indigenous children separated from their parents and, following the progressive orthodoxy of the day, assimilated into Western culture. Now, such arrangements offend today's sensibilities, and they offend all of us who are concerned about just humane behavior. But at the time, they were supported by politicians of all stripes, religious orders, and various denominations, and education reformers. Indigenous people are, as is completely understandable, feeling anger over this and betrayal. The number of estimated remains at grave sites is astounding. More than 1,200 suspected unmarked graves were recently discovered at 5 former school sites in Western Canada, and it's long been known that there were a large number of fatalities. Now, political leaders all across Canada have been talking about this for months, about the bitter legacy of the whole thing, and trying to come up with a way that they can discuss it that's helpful and doesn't whitewash what happened. But the question is whether these church burnings are as a result of this or not. There hasn't been information that's been released. So whoever's been setting the fires, whether it's a particular group or it's just a select number of people, we don't know why it's happening. So perhaps it's in retaliation for this. This is truly just a guess. Anyway, back to the editorial by Paul Tunz in the Wall Street Journal. When Mr. Trudeau finally weighed in, he offered a tepid response that condemned a vague rise of intolerance and racism and hatred that we're seeing across the country. Although he said unacceptable vandalism and arson wouldn't fix intergenerational grief, the Prime Minister could have said more, right? As Mr. Trudeau dithered, others celebrated. Harsha Walia, executive director of the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association, Canada's oldest civil liberties group, tweeted a link to a story about church arsons and added, "Burn it all down." She resigned nearly 2 weeks later. The article finishes by saying that approximately half of Indigenous Canadians are now Christians. More Indigenous people claim Christian religious affiliation than Native spirituality, according to statistics. And a group of Indigenous Christians did hold a press conference on July 5th to condemn the violence. Burning down churches is not in solidarity with us religious people, said Jen Allen Riley, a Pentecostal minister. Some residential school survivors have remained Catholic and now have lost their place of worship and comfort. I don't know how much I can speak into this. Obviously, this is something that happened in a different country, but just as a human being, it's important, it's essential, in fact, to acknowledge the horror of this story. 150,000 Indigenous children separated from their parents and forced to become, quote unquote, Western. At the same time, fixing that, you can't fix that by burning churches down. And the silence on behalf of the Prime Minister is echoing even here into the United States. I read this and I got chills. I thought, we're so incapable. We just have lost our cultural language of repentance, of apology, and of forgiveness. We don't have it anymore. We're so distanced from the Christian story that we don't know what that vocabulary means anymore. And so when a situation like this comes up and we read what happened historically, we don't know anymore how to repent. And we don't know how to apologize. And we don't know how to grieve and lament over those things. And then we don't know how to receive an offer of forgiveness from the God who is most grieved because of his children that were injured. And then we don't know how to be restored and move on and be reassembled into community. So the story is grievous in many ways, but I think the main reason I wanted to bring it up is just so that you would know. It was something I didn't realize until today, and I thought it was important to share with you, the listeners of The Ride Home. All right, time to take a break. When we come back, Amy Grant will be with us. Amy is performing a concert Friday night at the Palace Theater. It is going to be absolutely terrific. If you've loved Amy's music and her just attitude and personality, the way she's embraced so many things in her life over the last decades in public, then I hope you stay with me. It's a really great interview. We did it last night. Very happy to share it with you on today's edition of The Ride Home. So stay close. We'll be right back. Amy Grant has had a long career making beautiful music. Since she burst on the scene as a teenager, she's really altered, I think, what we imagine Christian music to be, and has often been on the forefront of both adulation and criticism, both of which I can imagine have been tough to take. But she is still at it, still following Jesus, still making beautiful music. And you can hear and see Amy live this Friday at the Palace Theater in Greensburg. Showtime is 7:30, but you better get your tickets fast because they are almost sold out. I'm so happy to have Amy with me now. Amy, welcome in.
Thank you so much.
So such good news that you're back to bringing live music to Pittsburgh. I mean, such a terribly difficult time during COVID when the arts took such a hit. Did you miss making live music, and did you miss going out to hear it?
Yes, and yes.
Yeah.
It's funny. I think anybody that tours over a lifetime, decades, there's this kind of fantasy part of you that thinks, gosh, wouldn't it be great to never have to pack another suitcase? Mm-hmm. And then it happens. And you go, no. So all of us have come back. And we're just so glad to be on making music. I had tickets to a show that I did not go to because I was not quite ready to be in a crowd, and then I had tickets to Jackson Browne and James Taylor, and I did go to that.
Oh, I bet you were so glad.
Oh my gosh, all I could think of was, look at all of us in this arena. I had on a mask, not everybody did, but we're all singing along. Yeah. And that's just what I miss about music. It's just such a community building, reservoir filling experience, whether you're on stage or in the crowd. And Zoom does not it is not the same thing.
No, it really isn't. But were there moments? I mean, I did this radio show from my spare room for almost a year and a half, which was crazy town. And at first it was horrible, but then I got to kind of like it. I don't know if it was like Stockholm syndrome, you know what I mean? Like I'm embracing my captors or whatever, but like I was okay with it after a while, and then I didn't want to come back. Did you have moments like that where you thought, well, maybe I don't need to be out. Maybe I don't need to be on a tour bus ever again?
Well, I think all of us had just moments of going, the thing I felt all those things. And I mean, for me, the hardest thing was actually getting back in shape because
you mean vocally?
Yep. Yeah. And I felt that way. I mean, you just don't sit around and make a lot of music when there's nobody to play for.
Sure.
And I've got friends that were songwriters, and they said, are we all just imposters? Like, are we doing it just for other people? Like, if we were real artists, would we just be, like, making music every day?
Yeah.
But it's shared. It's a shared experience. Mm-hmm. And so, I did love being home. But when it was time to start getting back in shape and being in rehearsals, I didn't realize how emotional that would be. The first sound check we did in Colorado, I couldn't get through a song without crying. And it was just because I'll never take it for granted again.
Yeah, I remember the first